It was the most luxurious ship ever built, carrying thousands of people and crowned by the press as practically unsinkable. Yet, on its very first voyage, it vanished entirely beneath the freezing Atlantic. In the early 1900s, society was riding high on a wave of technological innovation. There was a prevailing, almost absolute confidence that human engineering could conquer the raw forces of nature. The Titanic was the ultimate physical proof of that confidence. Looking at the massive scale of its bow taking shape in the dry dock, it is easy to see why people were so captivated. It was the largest moving object ever created by human hands. Newspapers eagerly printed stories about its watertight compartments and advanced engineering, convincing the public the vessel was safe from the sea. The Titanic functioned as a declaration that engineering had finally solved the problem of vulnerability, an ideological monument to a society that believed it had moved past the reach of disaster. Inside, the ship resembled a sprawling, opulent palace. Walking down the grand staircase, passengers found themselves surrounded by modern electric lighting and intricate woodwork that rivaled the finest buildings in Europe. With features like this carved wooden clock and heavy bronze cherub lamps, the environment was carefully designed to provide the comforts of a grand hotel, shielding passengers from the reality of the ocean outside. In the massive first-class dining saloons, expansive rows of tables sat under beautiful decorative ceilings, offering lavish, multi-course meals. When the Titanic finally pulled away from the dock in England on April 10, 1912, crowds gathered to cheer. On board were more than 2,200 people, ranging from wealthy business magnates in first class to hopeful immigrants packed into the lower decks. The atmosphere was thick with excitement and the promise of a new life in America. Everyone on board was looking forward, completely unaware that they were sailing directly into their own destruction. For the first few days, the crossing was perfectly smooth. Passengers strolled along the upper decks and admired the vast water, enjoying a relaxed routine. However, wireless operators had been receiving multiple warnings from other ships about dangerous ice fields ahead. Despite having this critical information, the crew kept the Titanic moving at a high speed toward New York. Then came the night of April 14. The sea was unusually calm, and the sky was clear, but there was no moon. In the pitch black, jagged icebergs like this one floating in the shipping lanes became practically invisible because there were no waves breaking against their bases to give them away. Just before midnight, lookouts finally spotted a massive shadow directly in their path. The crew desperately tried to turn the enormous ship, but they were too close. The starboard side violently scraped along the underwater ice. Up in the comfortable cabins, many passengers barely felt a slight shudder, with some even laughing and playing with the ice that spilled onto the deck. But deep beneath the waterline, the steel plates had buckled, and freezing seawater was violently flooding into the ship. This diagram illustrates what the engineers discovered inside the hull. Seawater was filling consecutive forward compartments so quickly that the bow was being pulled downward. The sheer weight of the water made sinking a mathematical certainty. The crew began preparing to abandon ship, exposing a lethal systemic flaw. The Titanic was fully compliant with the maritime laws of the day, but those regulations were decades old. The vessel barely carried enough lifeboats for half the people on board. Officers were forced into agonizing decisions, strictly prioritizing women and children for the few available seats. As the tilt of the deck grew steeper, the initial confusion slowly turned into desperate panic among the crowds waiting behind. In the middle of that escalating chaos, these band members made a remarkable choice. They brought their instruments onto the freezing deck and continued playing music to try and maintain some sense of calm. The era's most advanced machine had failed. In its place stood the specific human weight of the disaster, the final notes of the band, and quiet goodbyes of families permanently separated. By the early hours of April 15th, the massive bow plunged deep into the ocean, lifting the stern high into the air. The extreme stress on the metal finally caused the mighty ship to tear itself in two before slipping entirely beneath the waves. In less than 3 hours, the grandest vessel in the world was gone, leaving scenes like this single, crowded lifeboat drifting alone. More than 1,500 people died in the open water that night. When the news broke, a wave of profound shock swept across the globe. Governments immediately launched formal inquiries, pulling in officials and survivors to demand answers about how such an impossible disaster occurred. The loss of the unsinkable ship broke the spirit of the age. The confidence that had defined early 20th century progress was replaced by a new, permanent caution regarding the limits of our own inventions. The tragedy forced immediate, strict changes to international law. Ships were strictly required to carry a lifeboat seat for every single soul on board, and 24-hour radio watches became mandatory, and dedicated vessels like this patrol ship were established to monitor dangerous ice fields. The Titanic story endures because it redefined how we calculate risk and the ethical weight of professional responsibility. It remains a stark dividing line in history, a permanent warning against the consequences of arrogance. The remains of the ship lie in the dark, freezing depths of the North Atlantic. Looking at these heavily rusted metal railings collapsing under the weight of the ocean, the decay is a blunt visual reminder that no human creation is ever truly invincible. The rusted wreck will eventually disintegrate entirely, but until then, it remains a silent monument on the seafloor, a lasting testament to extreme ambition, unimaginable tragedy, and the absolute limits of our confidence.